Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling from around the world. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us for the August webcast on making youth employment a priority. Continue to use the chat to tell us where you're calling in from. And we have some fun little chat activities as well laid out in today's session. So I'm going to walk through the agenda, just kind of give you guys a sense of what the flow is going to be like. Those of you who have, excuse me, participated in WFYC webcasts, you'll sort of know the format, and we do have several invited guests who are doing it for the first time. So we want to make sure that they are welcomed and feel comfortable in our webcast for today. So the agenda is going to be, again, some housekeeping. We'll kind of go over some useful tips to help you with your webcast experience. Then I'll sort of set things up with some opening remarks, talking a little bit about the World Federation, just so you have some context about the work that we do. And then I have the honor of handing it over to our invited presenter and guest for today. And then we're going to open things up for Q&A as usual. So couple of tips around a ideal Zoom experience or webcast experience. We're recording this session, right? So like we do always, this session is recorded and will be available on demand on the World Federation of Youth Clubs website. And the link will be emailed to you by Dawn at the conclusion of this session, as well as an evaluation form to get your feedback. And just as a point on the evaluation form, please give us your feedback, especially if there are topics that you would like to see covered in future webcasts. We really want to hear from you. Please keep the mute button on until the Q&A opens. Some of you prefer to put your questions in chat. Others prefer to raise your hand. Whatever your preference, it doesn't matter. All we ask is that during the planned prepared remarks that you keep your line on mute. And then for the best view experience, we encourage you to use the speaker view. You can find that in Zoom in the upper right-hand corner and just click on speaker view. This way it gives you the opportunity to see the presenters as well as see the presentation material. Okay, great. Folks are still rolling in. That's fantastic. So my name is Mark Shamley. I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the World Federation of Youth Clubs. That's a picture of me, maybe 20 pounds lighter with no beard, but it is in fact me. So it's a pleasure again being with you guys. I get to do this each month, and this is always a lot of fun. The mission of the World Federation of Youth Clubs is pretty straightforward. We are here to support youth organizations all around the world to develop, advance, and enhance your organizations in the work that you do to provide a positive environment for young people and a safe place for young people to develop the skills that they need to be successful. And that's our purpose. So our mission, what we do, and our purpose, why we exist, is one and the same. It's the idea that we want to strengthen organizations and strengthen the leaders of those organizations that provide place-based nurturing opportunities for young people. Our value proposition is broken into three sort of what I call swim lanes, if you will. The first swim lane is around guiding and consulting. That's the work that Tim Richardson and Jose Cruz and Glenn Permoy do, that one-on-one personalized assistance that we provide to you to help you solve problems and address issues that are unique to your organizations, okay? And many of you are going through the mapping process, that's our assessments, as well as the technical assistance plans, the TAPs. So again, that is the primary work that we do in guiding and consulting on the ground, working individually with your organizations. The second area is around networking and learning. This opportunity, the webcast we do each and every month, the international conference that takes place in the early part of the year. These are all opportunities for us to facilitate opportunities for you guys to learn from each other and to learn from the World Federation, as well as many of our collaborators who are coming to the table with resources and knowledge to help you provide more effective programming to young people. And then lastly is promote and amplify. The work we get to do is highlight the fantastic work that you do on the ground, right? Invest in your organizations through mini grants, provide recognition opportunities through our global recognition program, the Promise Awards, all designed to say, hey, we want to amplify the fantastic work that you're doing and the young people that you are impacting. All of these three main areas are sort of consistent around this idea of being a high touch organization. So we're not distant. We're not some organization that sort of you don't get to see and feel and touch. We want to make sure that we are standing shoulder to shoulder with you, providing you with all of the resources you need to be successful. Some of those resources I just mentioned: the personalized one-on-one consultation, the access to a network of collaborators, and that network grows each and every month. The annual conference, which will be virtual again next year. The Promise Awards, which will air on September 14th. And please tune in to the Promise Awards. The monthly newsletter that just went out yesterday is a terrific resource. Again, please tune in continue to tune in to the webcast, and more resources are being developed online that you'll see announced in the coming months, coming weeks and coming months. So that kind of gives you a flavor of the World Federation in terms of the work that we do, our mission, our purpose, the resources that we provide in support of our affiliate network, which is growing, by the way. We're at 74 organizations worldwide. So that's extremely exciting. So let's do a quick check-in, okay? So what is your favorite way to relax and recharge your energy? Okay, let's see who's going to be responding in the chat. I'll start first. For me, it's exercise. So getting outdoors, doing some activity, cycling, spinning, all of those kinds of things. That's what I find to be helpful in recharging my battery. Let's see. Dawn, do we got some folks who responded?
We do. Tennis, gardening, walking, a whole bunch of things going here.
Oh, we got some guitar players. Oh no, look at that.
Meditating, walking, tennis. We need to take lessons here. Cooking.
Ooh, cooking, I like that.
Great.
I should have said eating. I should have said eating is a great way for me to relax. So, all right, well, thank you guys. I appreciate you taking time to check in, participate in our fun little check-in. It's just a great way to sort of inspire some interaction. And again, later in the presentation or after the presentation, we encourage you to use the chat to post your questions. And again, if you're not comfortable using chat and you want to raise your hand, you can do that also. All right, so let's get into our subject matter for today, okay? All right, we have a terrific speaker, guest speaker, an expert on youth employment to join us, Susana Puerto. Susana leads the global initiative on decent jobs for youth, an inclusive, multi-stakeholder partnership chaired by the International Labor Organization to scale up action and impact on youth employment within the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Her latest work through Decent Jobs for Youth has focused on understanding the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on young people and advising on policy solutions. Over the 10 years of experience on the promotion of youth employment, Susana has managed and contributed to multiple efforts boosting employability and job creation. Prior to joining ILO, Susana worked at the World Bank and the International American Development Bank. She serves on a number of executive boards of youth employment partnerships. Susana is an economist from Georgetown University. Go Hoyas, Susana. So I'm pleased to introduce Susana Puerto. And I'm going to stop sharing. So Susana, you can come in.
Yes.
Share
Thank you so much, Mark. First, let me know if you hear me well.
I hear you fantastic. Yes.
My connection is not great, and I just realized that when you were talking, but fingers crossed, everything goes well.
Right.
So we have my presentation in the screen. It is a pleasure to join you. Thank you so much for the invitation. It is great to meet new people and to share a bit of our work, but most of all to learn about your work and your experiences about working with young people, working for young people, and supporting this transition into youth employment. So let me start by talking about where we are today. As we know, the pandemic has had a very significant impact on the lives of young people. So let me start a little bit by discussing, basically young people are always heavily impacted by economic recession, but this time is worse in terms of the size, but also the speed of the economic impact. And in terms of the extent to which young people are disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So what we see here is basically, and we started documenting this last year when we carried out a survey, a global survey among young people, is that COVID-19 inflicted a triple shock. It is a shock of, first of all, disruptions in education and training, and we'll talk about that, about increased difficulties for young job seekers to transition into decent jobs. But for those that were working prior to the pandemic, the impact is quite meaningful as regards to job losses, income losses, and and many other, let's say, side effects of these disruptions. So I will talk a little bit more about that, but all in all, the latest information that we have based on the labor force surveys that are available, you may imagine that many countries, especially in the developing world, were not able to update the labor force surveys. So we don't have global estimates as of today. With the estimates we are using are from the countries that could carry out some surveys in 2020 that can give us an idea of what's happening today. And based on those countries that I will say with this sample of around 50 countries, we estimate a global fall on youth employment by 8.7% in 2020, which is comparing to the fall that we see in the employment of adults, which was about 3.7%, and we can naturally see what is, how strong the pandemic has hit young people, and in particularly young women. We see, for example, in Latin America, this is where we register the greater employment losses. For example, in Argentina, Chile, Peru, more than 2 out of every 5 young female workers lost their jobs. So one natural question from our end was, so what happened? No? Where did the employment losses go? So it turns out that most of the young people that lost their jobs transitioned into inactivity. So you may have think, no, they simply became unemployed, but it's actually a little bit worse than that, because becoming inactive also means that there are a lot of young people that are not looking for jobs. So this is what we call it's part of what we call youth that are not in employment, education, and training, right? And I'm happy to go a little bit more in details on that. But basically, so what we have seen is vast increases in the number of young people that are NEET, need status, not in employment, education, and training. And unfortunately, there is also a gender dimension when we speak about young people in need status. For instance, around 63% of the fall in young female employment in Canada could be attributed to an increase in the number of young women that are classified as NEET. So this slide basically talks about the disruptions in education and training. And this is a very early shot of the, very early picture of the impact of the pandemic. So what we saw from the very beginning is that nearly 1 in 8 young people basically experienced a total stop in their education or training. This is based on the survey we ran between April and May of last year, so really very early stages. And the other thing that we saw is that while many schools and universities and institutions managed to transition into a new ways of delivering education and training, that transition was not equal across the world, as we know. So what we saw back then is that 2 out of 3 young people were reported that they were learning less than before the outbreak, and 2 out of 5 report that they sort of felt and had this experience or fears that their education might be delayed or totally fail. And we'll talk about what are your experiences and how young people you are working with have experienced these situations when it comes to education and training. But it is important to think about how we can strengthen education systems, how we can together work with government so that strengthening is more systemic than our individual approaches. And the other element that I wanted to share is how widespread was the impact on mental well-being among young people. So again, these were the very early signs of what other colleagues and organizations have already documented as a very meaningful impact of the pandemic, which is the deterioration of the mental well-being among young people. And what we saw back then is that 1 out of 6 young people were probably affected by anxiety or depression. And this is something that was the incidence of this was much more higher among young women or among younger youth. And by younger youth, I mean those that were between the ages of 18 and 24. So it is also important to correlate this anxiety and depression probabilities with what young people were experiencing at school or on the job. So this came quite strongly. So we can actually make a nice connection. Well, I don't want to say nice, but just a very straightforward connection between how they were affected in let's say in their education, their transition to employment, or their jobs per se, and their mental well-being. So all in all, basically what we call is an urgent attention to strengthen the transition to decent work. And Mark asked me, what is decent work? He wanted to make sure I touch base on this. And when we speak about decent work, it is quite high standards. And sometimes people say, well, it really doesn't matter. What is important is that people have a job. It doesn't really matter the quality of that job. But it turns out that when it comes to young people, that those very early experiences in the labor market are almost definitive for the rest of their working life. So having any job certainly is better than none. But if we want to think about longer term, if we want to think about the path of transition towards sustainability, towards a meaningful experience in the labor market, then we need to start thinking about the quality of those jobs. So decent work, it is defined as a job that upholds rights, the fundamental and basic principles of rights at work. It is a job where there is social protection. That means that while people are working, they are also investing in their future and looking, into their pensions and have access to all safety nets or other, let's say, social protection floor, which is something that the ILO speaks quite a lot about. And it is also a job that that provides a meaningful experience for young people. So that means it is a job that is paid. It is a job that is fairly paid, and that when it comes to young people, it is also a learning experience, because many of the young people we are talking about, this could be their first exposure into the labor market. So this is a job that really upholds all of these sort of set of elements that are quite important. When we think about the transition from school to work, for example, we were deciding, around 5-7 years ago, like how do we measure that transition, and is the transition to what? No, what is the end point of that transition? Is it a decent work, or what exactly it is? And if it is a decent work, it sometimes is really hard to get to those standards of, having a pension, having, social security and all of that. So we decided that we felt comfortable thinking about a job that includes that there is certain stability, so that there is a contract of at least 1 year for a young person, but it is also that it also takes into account the perspectives of young people. So one thing is, let's say, the quantitative things, the things that we can say, well, it is paid, etc. But the other thing is how young people feel about that job. So the level of satisfaction about that job. So when we were talking on working on school to work transitions, we defined that end side of the transition as a job that is stable, but it also implies that is satisfaction among young people. So all in all, this is about definitions, but let me go to the core of this slide, which is really talking about, let's talk about how we make that transition. So the destination is something that is quite important, and it's a destination that implies that we have to work not only on training and education of young people, but also on the job creation side of things, what we call the labor demand. So there are a bunch of different policies that governments take into account and implement. For example, counter-cyclical fiscal policies that imply that when the crisis came, when the pandemic came, and the economic crisis came right after, then there is certain spending into policies that will activate the economy and therefore also activate employment. So sometimes when we work with NGOs or at NGOs, our work doesn't always touch this level of policies and this level of investments, but I think it is quite important that we bear in mind that anything we do should be connected to this. There are opportunities in job creation that the government naturally fosters, but there is also the role of the private sector that we can influence and that we can advise. So here you have, for example, in some countries, there are opportunities to create new jobs specifically for young people by opening niche jobs in niche sectors, such as the digital economy or the green economy. The second part of this is about the path. So how we strengthen that path. And here there is a bunch of different types of interventions that we can think about. And one, obviously one of those is education and training, the role of soft skills, what the ILO calls core skills. And there are also other types of interventions like youth guarantees, which are very strong in Europe, and they started being implemented since the last economic crisis in 2008. And since then, let's say we've been working around those different pathways for young people. A pathway where there is a wage subsidy, a pathway where there is an apprenticeship system, or just a return into education. So there are different pathways, and we need to bear in mind that there is no one silver bullet for every young person. So a lot of these different pathways is what help us to manage each case and address the needs of every young person. And there are other types of interventions like social protection, subsidized employment, and something that is very important that Mark also wanted me to talk about was entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship, usually we talk about entrepreneurship as developing skills for young people to succeed in entrepreneurship, but it's also about those that are already in business and how to make sure that their businesses survive and what is the kind of support that we can lend to small and middle enterprises that are led and run by young people. And then last is about inclusiveness. The mental well-being elements just really highlighted how important it is that for us overall and the different types of interventions that we run to integrate certain elements like psychosocial support, but also it is also important to touch base on the importance of OSH measures like occupational health and safety and others. And I wanted to highlight here the important role of public employment services. Many times they are the ones doing a lot of the matching between the supply and demand. Depending on the country where you work, those public employment services may be stronger or weaker, I don't know, but this is a very important element that for me it is crucial to modernize and it is crucial to support because it is a tool that governments use. That is a tool that is relatively decentralized, so it's across the countries, and that deserves a lot of attention so that we strengthen the matching process that happens within public employment services, the counseling that takes place in there, and a lot of the connection between the education and training that happens in school, TVET system, even through some NGO-run programs, and the labor market. So let me just quickly then talk about some of the evidence that we have seen about what works. So we made this study that analyzed the impact of active labor market programs. And what we call active labor market programs is different types of interventions. So first of all, we included the youth employment programs that provided training, others that provided entrepreneurship promotion, others that provided like subsidized employment, and others that specifically provided public, let's say, employment services, counseling, etc. So all in all, what we see from those interventions, studying all the impact evaluations that we could find from the 90s into 2014, we could see that, like all of these interventions in the aggregate, they lead to positive labor market outcomes for young people. However, in many cases, this is an investment that takes time to grow. It means that that even though, like, let's say a young person goes to a training and we may not see the outcomes immediately in the next year, we may see them in 2 years, or as an impact evaluation that I run with a colleague from the World Bank in Kenya, there are some impacts that we see 3 years after. So there is an accumulation of human capital there that is important to think about, and it doesn't mean we should stop investing in young people through these types of interventions, rather just, let's say, continuing a pathway that will lead to positive results. We also saw that it's important to bear the many differences across countries. When we made the analysis, we saw that active labor market programs for young people in, let's say, low-income and middle-income countries were working better than in high-income countries. And it is about, a lot of institutional differences that are there, but what it means is that these extra expenses or expenditures from the government through these type of interventions were quite, the marginal impact of this was quite high in some of these countries in developing contexts. So it is something to bear in mind. it is also important, and this is not new, that comprehensive employment programs work better than standalone interventions. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight is that profiling is quite useful to meet individual needs and to address the constraints that some people face. And profiling means understanding the individual, no? Having a good targeting strategy, but also within that targeting strategy, really understanding, what is the market that they are facing, and what are the sort of the initial endowment they bring with them, no? What is their knowledge, their skills, the different constraints that are there. So when it comes to business training, I wanted to highlight, this is a recent, last year, a meta-analysis of business training interventions. And one of the things that the author, David McKenzie, found is that traditional training works. That means that the entrepreneurship training that has been evaluated, and I give you the example of the ILO's Start and Improve Your Business, which is basically a training package for young people at different stages, or not necessarily only young people, but to say for people at different stages in their business cycle. So to start up, to enhance and strengthen their businesses, etc. So he found that this kind of programs work, but there is also promise for other alternative measures. So one of the things that was interesting was that focusing on women, or tailoring the training specifically for women, also led to positive results. And this is in part we see from the evaluation that we did in Kenya. He also sees that customizing the training to the local needs and the use of peers and mentors were sort of design features that were showing a lot of promise in terms of positive results. And then using psychology to develop alternative dimensions of entrepreneurial skills. So this doesn't happen in all markets, in all countries, but wherever there could be experiments where they could bring different characteristics of entrepreneurial skills, using psychology to teach negotiation skills, for example. Those kind of little tricks were making sense in terms of the impact of those projects and programs on young people. And on the right-hand side, what you'll find is some ideas that are proposed in terms of what are things that we can explore further, what are ideas that haven't really been tested to the extent that we can say this works, but it's worth exploring, for example, the use of technology in delivering business training. I'll jump into the next slide because I wanted to make sure that you are aware of this new framework around soft skills. We call it core skills. And what is important for me here is to like usually we speak about soft skills and we talk about especially the social emotional skills, communication, teamwork, etc. And we all know that this is crucial to not only for young people to enter the labor market and to get a job, but also to stay in that job. There are other kind of skills like problem solving that we have discussed in different fora. And this is also important. And so what I really wanted to highlight is how crucial it is nowadays. And this is why the ILO has integrated this new framework, including digital skills and skills for green jobs. It's an opportunity for us to really open a new space for young people to start building awareness and knowledge about what are these skills and what can these skills do for them. So on the digital skills, I think it's pretty obvious, and for all of us, perhaps on the skills for doing jobs a little bit less, but nevertheless, it's something that it is important, and I'll be delighted to hear whether you, in your experiences, integrate this kind of skills in your work. But this is something to bear in mind. And then Mark, last, and I hope not to spend too much time on this, he asked me to talk a little bit about what are the resources you guys can tap into. So I wanted to start by saying that this logo behind me, it's about a partnership of the UN system that invites different types of organizations governments, private sector, NGOs, youth-led organizations, parliamentarians, academia, etc., to come together and share experiences, synergize at country level with the objective of enhancing and scaling up action on youth employment. So this is the global initiative on decent jobs for youth, and it was launched back in 2016. And since then, with the leadership of the ILO, we have developed a series of tools and papers, reports, evidence that will be my first suggestions to you. Just check out what Decent Jobs for You does. If you're interested in joining, please reach out to us. We will be very happy to see more organizations join. But also importantly, look at what are the resources behind. So there is also the knowledge facility of that we have created. It's called Youth Foresight. This it started as the Decent Jobs for Youth knowledge facility, and we recently joined forces with UNICEF and Generation Unlimited to make sure that other sort of types of partners and organizations have access to resources that relate to young people. So these are resources across youth employment, education, youth engagement. So it is quite wide and quite vast. So this will be my second advice, and a resource that I will invite you to visit and to contribute. We recently launched a community forum within this knowledge facility. This means that we will have chats about what works. We will have chats about different sort of type of evidence and interventions, and as well as other topics beyond youth employment. So I will encourage you to stay tuned and join these conversations. And the last thing is really, there are lots of partnerships at regional and country level. And here I just put an example of our work on Africa, on the African digital economy with ITU, which is the International Telecommunications Union. So in here you will see a little bit of the model of intervention. As you may imagine, it is very important for me to make sure, or for us to make sure, that our interventions have a very strong foundation on the supply and the demand side. So that's why you see in the bottom of this slide that we're talking about job creation and entrepreneurship, thinking about sort of the labor demand. In the middle, we're talking about investing in digital skills, thinking about the labor supply and how we can build up the human capital, the strengthened human capital. And then on the right-hand side, you will see the importance of the matching, sort of the intermediation elements that bring supply and demand together. So similar to this, there are many other interventions where the ILO takes part, or other partners take part. So that's what is important to understand. Let's say a bit who is behind the partnership. What we have about 85 organizations that have joined. So each of them have different portfolios, different thematic priorities, and this is a resource that I will absolutely encourage you to tap on, because it is quite useful to make those synergies, but also understand who is doing what. And I think I will leave it there. I look forward to your questions and suggestions, and Mark, over to you. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Great. Thanks, Susana. I appreciate your presentation and your remarks. We're going to open it up to some Q&A. But can I start with the first question, Susana? Thank you so much for your remarks and the data that you presented, and the opportunity and the resources that are available to many of the affiliates that are on this call. One of the questions I wanted to ask is, some of these organizations and the folks who are on this call, they have a combination of young adults and young people, right? So when you think about those youngsters who will ultimately end up becoming young adults looking for work, what are some of the things that these youth leaders can be thinking about, planning for, to help prepare those young people So when they're ready to enter into the workforce, you mentioned some of the pathways, the digital and green skills and things of that nature. Do you have some specific things you could share around, here's some ideas when you're working with young people? Because my understanding of the data is if a young person is neat at a young age, then when they become a young adult, they will likely be classified as neat as well, meaning there'll be lots of inactivity and their employment opportunities would be limited. So that's a long bit of a question, but I just wanted to get a sense from you in terms of what these leaders who are running these organizations and working with young people, what are some of the things that they can do, especially with those younger age children?
Yes, thank you. So usually when we speak about young people, we speak about, well, the UN definition is 15 to 24, right?
Okay.
For us at the ILO, and obviously understanding this is a very old definition, and you know, people transition into adulthood earlier than we do today. So we try to look into data from 15 to 29, or just considering whatever young is defined in different countries. So I want to highlight that because many times people define young people as adolescents as well. So, and I think there are slightly different types of interventions there. But let's say if we are focusing on the transition into employment, I did mention two things. So I wanted to place a lot of attention on the soft skills and how important it is to think about not only the social emotional skills that we often speak about, but other type of core skills like basic digital skills and other skills that relate to the green economy. And I think this is quite important for us to push for, because it is a little bit going beyond the standard elements of that young people will see at schools, in the curriculum, etc. The other element that I wanted to say is that when it comes to preparing young people, it is important to ensure that our interventions also brings sustainability and bring institutional capacity to the public interventions that are out there. So making connection between our interventions and the interventions of local governments, it is important. It is important because they have many times more scale than we do. And it is important because they will continue doing that even after our projects or programs close. So building that capacity, building partnerships with them so that we can work together in those issues of preparing young people to and for the labor market, it's important. Many times entrepreneurship is seen as a solution. I'm truly not against it, but what is crucial is to make sure that we don't push young people into entrepreneurship when there are no, there are no skills, or when there is no sort of
support system,
a business climate around it, right? Because what we will end up with is young people that are with debt, or young people that are with frustrations, right? So I think this is quite important. I have seen a lot of work that young people do through cooperatives that is quite meaningful, and I want to highlight that because in different country contexts, cooperatives are a way for young people to really have a good start in the labor market. One of the things that cooperatives do is that they reduce risk. They reduce the risk that some businesses run. They also build a lot of those soft skills that we spoke about, the team, the collaboration, a lot of stuff. So this is something that brings value, and this, I think, this working together and supporting each other is important. Then I also wanted to highlight the importance of investing in young women. So we saw the numbers, we saw the vulnerabilities there. So this is something that is important to focus on. There are many interventions that, for example, focus on STEM as a way of preparing young women for the labor market. That is fine. I think what is important is to really, before coming up with any intervention or idea specifically, is to understand the context and where are the opportunities for job creation. As I say many times, NGOs have a greater access to private sector than other types of organizations. So this is a good way of influencing how private sector hires, how private sector engages young people, bringing, for example, mentoring schemes within businesses. And private sector doesn't mean that we are talking about corporations. It also means that we can work with small and medium enterprises in facilitating these processes of absorption or transition. One of the things that I highlighted as well is around apprenticeships. So there are different ways of or sort of typology of work-based learning programs. So it could be internships, it could be apprenticeships, and other types of traineeships, right? So when it comes to internships, of course, what we advise is to place young people in paid internships because of the pathway, right? But it is also important to see how the partnerships that we build with the private sector may also lead to some sort of apprenticeship process where the young people are learning something at school or a training institution and then are able to bring those experiences to certain companies in a way that is a soft transition and that may carry certain probability for that young person to stay in that job. And then, let me pause there because I have an idea that is lost in my mind, but maybe you'll bring it back.
Yeah, Susana, there are a couple of other questions that have come through. Yeah. So I'm going to check with Dawn because it looks like we have a couple of really good ones. So Dawn, do you want to?
Sure. Thank you, Mark. Yes. So there is a question from Claire Marie. She first of all wants to thank you. And then she is representing the Youth Inclusion Network, which is a network of companies committed to the inclusion of youth from excluded backgrounds. She wants to know what would be your advice to mobilize the private sector in an efficient way in order to provide employment to youth without any diploma or skills.
I'm so sorry, Don, but I don't know if it's only me, but the sound was not very good.
Yeah, let me read it for you, Dawn, if that's okay. Can
Sure.
everyone hear? Susana, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So this is from Claire Marie, and she represents the Youth Inclusion Network, which is a network of companies committed to the inclusion of youth from excluded backgrounds. Okay, so that's the context, and that's Claire. Her question is, what would be your advice to mobilize the private sector in an efficient way in order to provide employment to youth without any diploma or skills? So employment to youth without any diploma or skills.
Yeah. So I have seen amazing work by different NGOs in liaising with the private sector. I think some of the key elements to work on these are having a very strong value proposition. No, so what is the private sector looking for, and what are we bringing on into that equation? Situations like what I mentioned about an apprenticeship system, even if you don't do the whole, let's say what we call a quality apprenticeship system, but think about the design of an intervention that can link the education system with the private sector. It's an important way of really addressing the needs of the private sector. In this case, the employer is basically in the driving seat. The employer will tell you what are the needs, what is the kind of profile that they are looking for, and then it is really about working with training institutions, or with education institutions in crafting that material, the curricula, and the different that will address those needs. I have also seen organizations that work, for example, with young people that are living care, that orphans and other young people that do not have very strong networks. And what I see is that for this, let's say, one could say one way of addressing a lot of the needs of young people that are not so well connected is through counseling and constant, let's say, mentoring in terms of the process. There is a lot of hand holding there. Unfortunately, these interventions are intensive in terms of the follow-up and the support services that we deliver to young people, but are often proven necessary to address those barriers. And then there are a series of support services that interventions can provide to young people to open doors. For example, there are interventions that provide transportation support to the jobs. There are other interventions that provide childcare for young women to be able to move to their jobs and leave their children in care. So playing with, understanding, what motivates young people to go or not to go to those jobs, and addressing those barriers are important, at the same time as understanding what is the demand from the private sector. And then something that I saw working quite nicely are interventions that create mentoring systems within the enterprises, so that the employees from those companies become mentors for some young people that enter their companies. And I understand that if you don't have a degree, it is difficult, but there are ways of certifying skills and knowledge. Very often, public employment services are able to certify, or there are other ways of understanding what are the skills that young people bring. But let's say it is a matter of finding building up that partnership and hearing out what the private sector needs and how we can address those barriers and those gaps.
Right. Susana, we have time for just one more question. And this is from Isha, I think, right? And so the question—
I think we have many Ishas.
We have many Ishas. Oh, we have many Ishas on the call. Okay. So can you please throw some more light on the use of psychology to develop alternative dimensions of entrepreneurial skills?
Yeah, sure. So we have, I remember we wanted to evaluate an intervention in Uganda that was focusing on, it was basically, how can I say, like building up an entrepreneurship curriculum in schools, right? So one of the things that we wanted to test is what works best. If it's like a very strict curricula or something softer. So this is where a lot of psychosocial or psychometrics will come into account, sort of understanding or let's say going beyond a very hard curriculum and thinking about different ways of embedding skills and knowledge about entrepreneurship to young students. And one of the ways that the colleagues work on was precisely using some of the theory of negotiations within psychology to teach about negotiation skills to young people. So there are things that are, let's say, less theoretical, and that one needs really like soft ways of teaching. so that they can, internalize them much further than just reading out what negotiation is, or some tactics and some elements are better ingrained and understood when you bring some psychology in it.
Great, thank you. So I think that's going to pretty much do it for today, everyone. We're just about 3 minutes before the top of the hour, and I want to thank Susana for all of her incredible insight and knowledge. Susana, where are you calling from? Where are you dialing in from?
I am
what part of the world? What part of the world?
Yes. Thanks. I am based in Switzerland and Geneva.
Okay.
I am originally from Colombia, though.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so thank you, Susana. So you have people
It's
from
a pleasure.
all over the world.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And again, all of the resources that Susana shared will be available on the World Federation of Youth Clubs website. And I just want to also give you guys a quick heads up on a few things that are coming up. Oops, excuse me. So let's have a little technical difficulty. Bear with me for just 1 second. All right. Can you guys see the slide here?
Yep.
Okay, terrific. So yeah, so you're going to get a follow-up email from Dawn. In that email, there will be a link, right, Dawn, to the presentation, to the slides. I also wanted to make everyone aware that we have the Promise Awards celebration coming up. This is our global recognition program, and so please tune in for the Promise Awards. And not only tune in, share with your colleagues, share with folks within your network, board members, young people. We want to get as many folks tuned into the Promise Awards on September 14th. And it's going to air from 10 to 11 o'clock, and that's Eastern Standard Time, okay? So the next webcast is going to take place on the 23rd of September, and we're going to focus on revenue generation, right? So that's something that's extremely important to all of your organizations. And lastly, if you have any questions about the webcast or anything you need answers to regarding World Federation or other initiatives that we're launching, please just email us at admin@wfyc.com. So with that, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your energy. We really appreciate you taking time to join us for today's webcast. And Susana, thank you to you and the ILO team for all of your support in today's meeting.